Yanamami Tribes of the Amazon Rainforest, a local geopolitical fight for survival by Lewis Powell. The Yanamami Indians are a group of about 20,000 indigenous people who are living in approximately 200 to 250 different villages in the Amazon rainforest. Their prime location is on the border between Venezuela and Brazil. Yanamami culture embraces many rituals and the use of hallucinogenic drugs. Their term that they use for the drug is yacuna. Yanamami shaman is a leader of the tribe in medicine and in rituals and also in visions that he receives about the village. They also have attacks from other villages, so the shaman is the individual who is accepted as creating a protection in the spirit world around their village. The shamans call what they represent, they call spirits into themselves to receive visions and insight, and they call these spirits their children. During the ritual or during the use of the hallucinogenic drug, they'll motion and call and say, "Come to me, my children, come to me, my children." And as they receive that spiritual influence, they begin to give prophecies and explanations of events and issue promise of protection and good weather and great crops and so forth. The shaman is also used when someone gets ill. He'll go through his chanting and his different rituals to help that person get well again. One of the unusual traditions of the culture of the Yanamami Indians is that womanhood begins at the first menstrual cycle for a girl, which is age 10 to 12, and the girl is immediately married after she's been isolated from the group for about 10 days. The ceremony between the bride and her husband is practically non-existent. The husband is picked by the parents and given over, and they live together, and they're a husband and wife. The husbands have the right to beat their wives, and there is no retaliation at all. There's no protection from the wife being injured by her husband. We have recorded from a visit in 1968 that gives a recording of first impressions. This is a quote. "I looked up and gasped when I saw a dozen burly, naked, filthy, hideous men staring at us down the shafts of their drawn arrows. Immense wads of green tobacco were stuck between their lower teeth and lips, making them look even more hideous, and strands of dark green slime dripped or hung from their noses." So the Yanamami are a particular people of indigenous Indians that are considered one of the last primitive societies that exist on the face of the earth. The Venezuelan government has gone to great lengths to protect the Yanamami and their lands. And the Yanamami Indians are incurring problems that they can't fight alone, and their existence is dwindling because of certain things that are happening. When the husband marries a woman, the husband is then required to work for and service for the bride's parents. And this could vary from 2 to 3 years. After those 2 or 3 years, though, normally the bride and her husband, the husband and wife, go back to live with his family. Now, the shelter that they live within is a community shelter. And usually the village is nestled in the Amazon rainforest, and it's a semicircle or a circle-shaped shelter. And each section is for a particular family. And so the village may vary in size from about 50 people to maybe over 100, maybe over 150 people. They have dress where they use the down feathers of a bird to put in their hair as decoration. They also use color to paint their skin, and they use piercing. Men will pierce themselves, their faces especially, with feathers or with bamboo sticks. And the ladies will also pierce their faces around the mouth and on their chin and their ears using bamboo sticks as decoration. Because of the newborn not being considered a human being until they've nursed, a newborn that has not yet nursed is still a neutral status, a thing in transition. It is not altogether a being, and it is possible to kill it if it displays a patent congenital malformation or if it is not wanted by its parents. But as soon as the child has nursed the mother's milk, even once, then this killing becomes impossible. Children who are not perfect are discarded by parents and left to die in the rainforest. This is a common practice among the Yanamami to this day. Most of Yanamami men enjoy relaxing unless on hunting trips. The women do most of the work needed around the village. The Yanamami grow corn for a staple food. Their harvest is celebrated through dance and music and colorful decorations. These celebrations might continue for days. Hallucinogenic drugs are used in almost every celebration. The Yanamami culture displays a certain amount of violence from the Yanamami. The Yanamami can be violent people, but most of the time they're peaceful. Fights can start for any reason, and they can stop as quickly as they begin. It is not uncommon for a raid from one village on another to take children. There is no regard for individuals in other villages because they are treated as enemies even if the tribes are related. One of the unusual characteristics of the Yanamami Indians is that the Indians do not eat animals they raise. And when this possibility is suggested to them, they declare that only true cannibals are capable of such action. If such a crime were committed, it would be subject to the same supernatural sanctions and the same illnesses that would punish a murderer. They have no domestic animals. As a result, for their meat, they must hunt. They can raise corn and vegetables, and of course eat those, but they never raise an animal and eat it, which means that they don't raise sheep, they don't raise a herd of goats or a herd of cows, and then eat those animals. What's necessary is for them to hunt for all their meat. Many of the Yanamami men especially are choosing to leave the Amazon rainforest because there's not enough food, and they search for work in cities. They're surprised, of course, at the civilization they find there, but the Yanamami who move into the city usually have a small group that has been established where they continue to practice many of their cultural rites. They return and visit their families in the rainforest, and they explain and tell stories about where they've been and what they've seen, which generates a desire among the other young people living in the Yanamami village to leave the rainforest and travel to the city. Yanamami will raid another village for women and food, and they create a blood vengeance between villages. If one person is injured in a raid, that village then will retaliate and injure equal or greater to that village that had done the raid. Even though the Yanamami Indians are considered citizens of the Venezuela government, and the Venezuela government protects them, gold mining is prohibited by the Venezuela government in the Yanamami lands, and yet it still continues, and many Indians are killed each year because of the gold miners that encounter the Yanamami Indians. The government banned both missionaries and gold miners from the Yanamami lands, from the Yanamami forests. The missionaries left upon their order coming from the government, but the gold mining continues. The Yanamami Indians have appealed to Venezuela's government to tackle the presence and impacts of illegal gold mining rather than deny the problem exists. In a statement released by the Yanamami organization Horwanami, the Indians call for the government to recognize how their lives and lands are being destroyed and contaminated by gold mining. After reports of a massacre, Venezuelan authorities continued to deny that gold miners are in the area. After a successful hunt for game, the Yanamami decorate themselves with feathers and paint. They relax and enjoy days of feasting and dancing and music. Leaders of the tribe will see visions and share them with the rest of the tribe. Christian missionaries lived among the Indians for years until the Venezuela government forced all missionaries to leave the rainforest. The Christian influence was changing the traditions of the Yanamami Indians. The Venezuela government wants to keep the Yanamami primitive because they are recognized as the only civilization remaining practically untouched by modern society in the world. Many anthropologists visit Venezuela specifically to visit the Yanamami people. One particular missionary, Margaret Gaint, has been with the Yanamami people for over 50 years. She and her husband moved from Canada and started living with the Yanamami, and raised their children among the Yanamami tribes. Margaret Yank created a written language specifically for the Yanamami. She printed a Bible in their language and shared this with Wycliffe. When she anticipated that missionaries were going to be forced to leave the rainforest, Margaret Yank, after the death of her husband, applied for citizenship in Venezuela, and she was approved 3 years before missionaries were forced to leave. Because she had her citizenship, she could remain, but years later she was forced to leave. She continues to serve the Yanamami people, but she does it on the edge of the rainforest. Margaret Yank spent most of her life in the Amazon rainforest, first learning who the Yanamami Indians really are, and then teaching them how to survive using a written language she created using sounds only found in the Yanamami language. She taught thousands of children how to express themselves using writing. She also introduced math skills in her teaching that allowed a serious advancement in their culture. Many of the children she taught and lived with remained in the Amazon rainforest after she was forced to leave by order of the Venezuela government. Their children, though, are beginning to leave the rainforest, and many have found Margaret in the city as she continues to give her life to help these primitive people join a not-so-civilized world. She still teaches each morning at 6 a.m. and each night at 7 p.m. Many Yanamami have learned to write and can now sign their names because of the love that she has for these people. According to how Margaret explained how they think and how they react to things that happen to them immediately and in the present. They don't react to things that might happen in the future. And as a result, they do not plan for the future. They do not plan for bad weather. They do not plan for bad crops. They plan only for the instant in which they're living. I was privileged to visit and stay with Margaret in 2012. I was allowed to go with her and join in the Yanamami culture in a group of Yanamami that had left the rainforest and have made their village close by where she lives. This is a display of John 3:16 in the Yanamami language that Margaret created. It took over 30 years to accomplish this. She tells me how children would come to her school and use banana leaves as their notebooks. Paper was hard to find, so they would gather old discarded paper from contacts in the city. Each month, they would receive a supply of paper and pencils. It was quite a joy to see the children learn to read and write their own language. The Yanamami still do not use the wheel. Their primitive culture is one of amazement to the rest of the world. They are very slow to change of any sort. Margaret's family lived with the Yanamami and became part of the Yanamami family, and this is why they trusted her. She tells me that they would not realize the impact to their defense reading and writing would bring them. As they struggle now for survival, they know the power of the written word, and many of them living in cities defend their brothers and sisters through legal battles. There is no expression that can explain the joy of when a child learns the letters and the meanings and can share thoughts through the use of letters and words. A whole new world opens up to that individual. Margaret continued to tell me during our interview that reading and writing brings a benefit to any civilization. Capturing thoughts and sharing them on paper creates a new world that the Yanamami Indians had never seen before. They did not embrace it at first, but soon they saw the benefits reach well beyond their understanding. Individual freedom is seldom realized unless one can read and write. A new type of Yanamami village forms in cities as the young men leave the rainforest and come to the city for food and a better life. Many return and share what they've discovered outside the rainforest when they enter the cities. The stories instill a desire in the young Yanamami men and women to follow them into the cities. This creates a serious problem for the villages. The older men are not being replaced by younger Yanamami men. Over the next 25 years, the villages might die if younger men of the Yanamami tribe don't take their traditional place among the tribe. Their survival is a serious struggle. The Yanamami Indians continue to live in primitive and traditional villages, but their future is becoming a serious fight for survival. Many see the sun setting on the last primitive civilization as many leave for the cities and others refuse to accept needed change within their villages. Time will tell if the Yanamami fight for survival can succeed.